Hi, I'm Langdon Norton. This is my grandfather, Randy, and I wanted to just say thank you, everyone, for coming. Our family greatly appreciates it. I just want to say a couple of things about my grandfather. Um, he took me to school every single day since I could remember till junior, sophomore year. So I spent a lot of time with him, and it's hard, losing a loved one. And this is the first time I could say I can truly experience it. And I don't know. I truly do love him. I'm thankful I got to spend the past 3 months with him. I was his caregiver. I spent a lot of time with him, and I realized how truly special personal time was with someone. And have that, I'm so thankful. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time and making the effort to come here today to honor my father. It means a lot to our family. My dad was a great man, and he was my hero. He instilled in me all the qualities and characteristics it takes to be a good man, and he was a shining example of that. He made me who I am today. I still remember vividly the day he picked me up from daycare. I must have been 4 or 5, and I had won this contest where they were seeing who could hang from the monkey bars the longest. And there's this big poster board up top with my name in big bold letters, and I looked up at him, and he was so proud and so happy for me. I could feel in that moment, even as a child, that he loved me. And I knew from then on I wanted to make sure my dad was proud of me for the rest of my life, which wasn't super easy. Partly because I was a full-fledged idiot in my youth, but also because my mom and dad had legitimate expectations and standards of their children. And if you fell short of that, specifically for lack of effort or pure stupidity, you were going to hear about it. And hear about it we did. My parents raised 4 amazing people, independent characters, who answered to only 2 people, and that was mom and dad. And I can tell you, now as an adult and a father myself, I am so eternally grateful and blessed to have had Randy Bush as my father. My dad was endlessly dedicated to his family. We were talking about it the other day as a family after he passed. He did not have hobbies. I mean, he liked to garden. Well, my mom liked to garden. So he liked to garden. But he didn't golf, he didn't fish, he didn't hunt, he didn't bowl, he didn't play cards. He worked his ass off and spent time with his family. And there was a time there in our youth for years where every single weekend they were at one of their children's sporting events. And in when I was really young, 5, 6, 7, there wasn't a coach for soccer, and my dad took that on. And he played center at football. He had no idea what he was talking about, but he was there every practice, every game. And what he instilled into me and drilled into me was hard work pays off. If you want to win, earn it. Practice, play harder than any other person on the field. Bust your ass every chance you get, because someday you won't be able to. Never, ever quit. You get one chance at life, you better make it worth it. If you get knocked down, get your ass up. Don't let anybody bully you. You stand up for yourself and you stand up for your teammates. Be a leader. If you want to win, everyone on your team needs to want to win and play hard, and you can pull that from them, Isaac. There might be a guy that needs a kind word, and there might need somebody with a foot in their ass, but you're the man to do it. I have found that those values and words of wisdom have led me to every success I've ever experienced in life. And Dad would hold you to your word. I mean, this was not a man that you wanted to BS or piss off. I'm looking forward to getting together with everybody here afterwards and just telling some stories about the legend that was Randy Paul Bush. Standing at 6'2", 240 pounds, Dad was an Adonis in his prime. He sported a Fu Manchu mustache with a mullet that he braided, and he had one thumb. All of what I just said is true. And he had a loud voice if necessary. His voice would boom across the soccer field, mostly with my name at the end of it. And I legitimately had street credit growing up because people thought my dad was a hard ass. I got pulled over one time, well, the second time, for driving the spree over to visit Warmington and Paulson when I had already been told not to do it and had been caught once and given a break by the cops. The first time they called Mom and Dad and had them come out and pick me up and Dad drive it home, which was a sight to see. He looked like a circus bear riding a tricycle on that spree. He could barely fit on it and white-knuckled it the whole way home with Mom behind me. Anyway, so I get to Andrews and I call my dad and let him know what happened. He wasn't happy. Not at all. And Andrew and Andy were right there listening to him through the phone. Paulson was legitimately scared for my safety. And Warmington, who grew up with a hard ass for a grandfather, thought it was hilarious. But as I left and marched home, so Dad says, get your ass home right now. I said, well, I can't drive the Spree. Can you come pick me up? No, walk, click. So I marched home in my 50-minute death march to certain peril. I knew my only chance at life was to pray that Mom was there. But I knew, and I learned a lesson that day, you need to weigh all of the possible outcomes of a decision, both good and bad, and weigh them against the perceived benefit. Was hanging out with Andrew and Andy for a couple hours worth the wrath of Randy Bush? No. My dad loved his kids enough that he wasn't going to let you get away with nonsense, disrespect, or poor behavior. I remember right when I was 12 or 13 and thought I was hot shit, I talked back to my mother in a rude and disrespectful manner, not realizing, one, that he was home, and two, he was behind me. That was a one-time mistake. My parents wanted more than anything for their kids to be good people, and they made countless sacrifices for us through the years. Their only vacations we took were to soccer tournaments out of town. And when I started to play travel soccer, my parents were driving all over the state of Michigan Saturday and Sunday for my games. Kalamazoo, Jackson, Grand Rapids, Flint, Saginaw, Metro Detroit, Midland, it was everywhere. And there was one weekend where I had a game in Rochester, Randy had a game somewhere else, and for whatever reason I decided to play in a 3-on-3 tournament with Chet and Milner. And we were so arrogant in our youth, we did not want to sub. So, as we got done with the morning game, we had to sprint to Saginaw from Rochester because we were going to be late for the game and we didn't have a sub. As we pulled into Saginaw Valley University, there was not another vehicle in sight. I could sense something was wrong. He calls Milner's mom and says, hey, where are you? And as he looked at me and said, oh, really? I knew I had made a mistake. He hangs up the phone and says, it's not in Saginaw Valley, Isaac. It's in Grand Valley. And I said, oh, that's Grand Valley, Saginaw Valley. It's just around the corner, right? No, son. This is the state of Michigan. This is Lansing. We live there. This is Rochester, where I drove you for your game. We are currently in Saginaw Valley, where you thought the tournament was, and it is actually in Grand Valley, Magellan. 2.5 hours later, we were able to get there in time. We actually took second during that tournament, and I blamed myself for missing the first game, but I learned another valuable lesson on that drive, which was peaceful. How to read a map. My dad was the most selfless man in the world. He always put his kids in front of his own needs and my mother in front of his. And he loved my mom more than life itself. These two were not to be trifled with as a tag team. Mom was playing chess when the rest of us were playing checkers, and she had the mountain from Game of Thrones as her muscle. I had a soccer game one time where my dad was the coach and my mother was the ref. All the teammates thought we were in for a good game. She's hooking us up, right? I knew better. Halfway through the game, she approaches me and says, are you swearing out here? The other teams say you're swearing. I was like, no, I'm not swearing. She looks right at me and gives me a yellow card. As I walked off the field, Dad said, what the hell did you do? And I was like, I don't know. By the time I got to the bench, I saw him turn around and make his way in my direction with enough pace that the mullet was flowing. I knew I was in deep shit and was in for long labor. When I got home, I took my shoes and shin guards off and didn't look up from the ground the rest of the game. For the record, I was swearing. And my mom could tell you weren't getting anything past my mom and dad, and they knew us well because they were there constantly and loved us endlessly. They were a team and loved each other more than anything. And that was more evident than ever in the last few years of his life when my father's health began to fail. He was eternally optimistic, never quit, which is what he taught me. And my mom was there for everything. He spent months in the hospital. She was there every day, 8-10 hours a day, hour drive there, hour drive back, never missed anything, constantly advocating for his best care, constantly looking out for him. She was an encyclopedia of Randall Bush. She knew everything. Half the time when he was asked a question, he would just look in her direction. And Mom, that's the reason that he didn't pass with you in the room. He couldn't give up with you watching. He was endlessly dedicated to you and would still be alive if you were there today. He loved you more than anything, and I know you loved him the same. You guys were an excellent example of what a married couple should be, and you've made all of us who we are today. My dad used to say, if you're lucky in life, you've got family that you can count on and love you. And I have been incredibly lucky. All of my family has been. My dad would do anything for us. In fact, he risked life and limb almost every game of my high school soccer career, videotaping the games on top of a press box 40 feet in the air, on the roof. No railing. This was not OSHA compliant. A stiff breeze and he was going overboard. And if you were lucky, in a lot of the games, we would watch them immediately afterwards. You would listen to my dad berating the ref for a poor game or talking shit about the opposing team under his breath. He did not hide his loyalty. He was not ashamed of it. That's who he was. He loved his family more than anything, and he didn't care who knew it or who it pissed off. I'm going to miss him. He was a great man. He was a great role model. He was a fantastic husband, father, uncle, brother, everything. I feel guilty sometimes thinking about myself as a father and what I need to improve on to try to honor his memory. He was a best friend. He taught me everything I know about life, and I'm going to miss listening to him teach my kids about life. He used to tell me, you get one name, Isaac, and you only get one chance at this life. What do you want people to say about you? What are they going to think of Isaac Bush? What type of person are you going to be? And I can tell you now as I stand here, as father myself, I hope they say he's just like his dad. Thank you.
I'm going to cry a lot more than Isaac did, so bear with me. I never thought this day would come so soon. Given Dad's stubbornness, I thought that we had many more years to spend together. Even in his last days, Dad's tenacity and desire to live showed. He fought the good fight for far longer than most, and more than any one man ever should. He was so strong. I'm sure you will hear some duplicate stories and quotes. Dad was a creature of habit after all, but hopefully I can share some personal experiences that will show you what a truly extraordinary man he was. So let me start off by telling you about the day I learned that my dad was a superhero. It was a holiday weekend. I think, Mom, you said it was Memorial Day. And we were living on Lapeer Road in Burton. I had to be about 4. I was outside with our dog at the time, Maggie, and saw her playing with what I thought was a fuzzy toy. So naturally, I went to take it from her. After grabbing that fuzzy tail, I was greeted by a real live squirrel who, instead of a squeaky toy, of course, it bit me on the hand, then took off up a tree. During the chaos that ensued, I remember watching Dad march with a ladder and a sledgehammer. I am sure you can all imagine what happened next. With it being a holiday weekend, animal control was closed, so we kept said squirrel in the freezer until Monday morning, only to hear that squirrels don't get rabies. Dad said we could always eat it, though. As many of you know, I am not the most graceful, and I am a bit accident-prone. I'm sure I heard Dad ask me if I walk much, more than anyone in this room. Through all the injuries, which are too numerous to list, Dad was the first one out there to give me comfort. His first concern was always making sure I was okay, even though more than likely he was laughing at the same time. When we hurt, he hurt. He was a fierce and protective and loyal and had the heart of a lion. Both the animals and the stinking ones that he liked to watch on Sundays. Dad was my biggest critic, but also my biggest fan. He would stop at nothing to help me achieve my goal, and that included telling me the hard truths. He would get up early to prepare the van for the long drives that Isaac has mentioned to their tournaments, with a bed in the back so that we could sleep on the way. Every summer, he would take Isaac and I to and from Aim High for basketball camp. We would play a game on the way where he tried his best for the truck to never come to a complete stop at a red light. Then Isaac and I would argue because we both wanted to sit in the middle seat of Old Red, since that meant we could lay on Dad's lap and nap on the way home. He had a way of just looking at you and you would know you were in deep shit. Or he was disappointed. I'm sure you all know that dad look, and he had his down pat. He never missed any of our sporting events, which is impressive since there were 4 of us. I always spent the time to find him in the stands, up at the top, in a corner so we could see everything, usually with a video camera to record. We all knew he loved us and that we made him proud, and that alone is worth more than all the gold in the world. I was very lucky to spend several years at home with just Mom, Dad, and myself. I was able to form a special bond with him during this time. People watching with him was the best. He shared his love of music with us all. Our personal favorite was Al Green. Dad was always Mr. Fix-It and would demand us to help. However, when we started, we'd just become a glorified tool holder and end up irritating him to no end. Eventually, he would send us on our way and just do it himself. He was a hoarder of epic proportions. Even if it was broken, he would keep it because he could use it for something. I'm still trying to figure out what he could possibly have used the old telephone booth in the basement for, though. Right? Dad was a born entertainer. He was like Robin Williams and was able to mimic anything. He and I would have full conversations with a lisp, much to my mother's dismay. I remember he would call my best friend in high school Shitney Wafer, and it would spiral from there. He would talk like Daffy Duck and Sylvester, suffering succotash, to all the grandkids and make them giggle. We could go back and forth for hours with our favorite movie quotes. Siblings, let's see if you guys can get this one. I'm not a witch. Willow, the baby! My mother, sister, and I all love Harry Potter. Dad was a good sport and would indulge us and watch the movies, even though he would always call him Henry Porter. I know secretly he loved the series just like us, but he would never admit it. His dad jokes were the best around. When we would say, I'm going to run to the store, he would always reply, you should take the car, it'll be faster. When we would whine and say, Dad, I'm hungry, he'd say, hi, hungry, I'm Dad. We used these frequently at my house. All of the grandkids were told at some point that they bit off his thumb. If someone called and asked for Randy, you would always hear girl or boy. I'm sure most of you have heard that at some point in your life when you called. The confused silence on the other end would be deafening, and then you would know it was a call you could hang up quickly. People would gravitate towards him anywhere we went. He made you feel comfortable and like you belonged. He was always the best dressed, credit to Mom. And he was well known for his hats. And he always carried his hanky. He was one of the hardest workers I've ever met. Kind of like the Energizer Bunny, he was up and moving before the sun and couldn't stop until well after it went down. I would come home from whatever sports practice and be napping on the couch. Naturally, I napped before I did my chore. Dad would always remind us kids how good we had it by telling us, when I was a kid, I had to walk to school story. Somehow each time he told it, the distance grew longer. There would be mountainous hills both ways. It was always snowing, and I think at one point he even didn't have shoes. I learned some valuable things from him. He taught me how to drive a stick shift, how to fold a fitted sheet properly, and how to clean a strawberry. Hint, use a McDonald's straw to get the core out. More importantly, he taught me the value of hard work and loyalty. He taught me that I was still worthy of love despite the stupid things I've done in my life. He adored my mother and would do anything to make her happy. Spending time outside putting up Christmas lights, hours shopping in the mall, and even decorating the house for every holiday. I remember watching them dance in the kitchen as a kid. He set the bar high for Ashley and I to find a man that would treat us the same. Dad once told me that he hoped I would find a love like he has with Mom, and I'm happy to say I found that with my husband, Steve. I could continue on and on with all of the ways this man was the most wonderful one you would ever meet. I was blessed to have him there for my first breath and to have been by his side for his very last. I was given the greatest honor to share his name. Here's to a life well lived. To Randall Paul. I love you, Daddy, always and forever.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. When someone slowly slips away, you may forget who they are, who they were, and it's replaced by what they were at the end, and only remember the end. So I want to take the time to remember, to remind myself, with my family, and you as well, who my dad was. My first memory of him was a greenhouse with a backyard and an El Camino, a big fluffy dog and a small black dog. And Christmas morning at that house, there are literally flashes of photos in time because I was so little. No, I was a baby. He's one of my core memories. I remember watching Sesame Street and laying on Amos with him a lifetime ago. I also remember the day my real dad came into town and wanted to take me out for dinner. I remember saying to him, "Do I have to call him Dad?" And he said, "It's okay if you want to." I said, "But he's not my dad." And that's who he was, always. A person who loved me, who made me feel home. He was my real dad. He called me Wiener. I know, it's an interesting nickname, but it was my nickname. And when things got real bad this summer, I walked into his room one day and he said, "Wiener." And I never knew how much being called Wiener would mean. And that's now a core memory at 43. There's a Wiener song too. Ask me later and I'll sing it to you. I've always joked he was a level 3 hoarder because he was close to it. When they were tearing up part of the cobblestone in Washington Street in Old Town, he took Justin and his friends down to load up the bricks in the truck and then store them under the pool. To be clear, haul them to the pool, stack them underneath the pool, and then remove them to make said patio by crawling underneath the pool and removing the bricks. He eventually found a use for things. Randy and I were told a few years back to come get crap out of the basement, so he had room that existed of maybe 3 boxes in total. Ran and I were all about it. We were ready to purge. He wasn't having it. Everything I had identified as something that could possibly go, nah. I'll use that. Part of my first coffee table that was broke, I'll use that. I found a bag of concrete in the corner. It had gotten wet, so it was hardened concrete. I was like, "What about this? It's 25 pounds of hardened concrete." He was like, "Nah, I'll use that." Mom and Dad had to leave to go to Flint, not sure why, but I said to Randy, "I'm going to throw some of this crap out." When they leave, he wasn't having that either. He basically escorted us off the property that day. Like I said, he found a use eventually. Most of you probably know about the oasis that is my parents' house and the soil that they created with years and years of composting and mulching. The 6-foot tomato plants, toil and hard work. He and Mom are hard workers. What they created, all in a yard that's basically clay. This summer there were no cucumbers, no zucchini. The garden was nearly impossible to navigate through. We closed the pool without someone barking orders at us. We limped through it. The cover is hanging on by a thread. In my defense, it's new, and it wasn't the one that required crowbars and 4 adults, 2 of which were under the pool shoving bags of pea stone into the cover. But when something worked, he kept it. No matter how much we complained, we limped through it. We limped through everything this last year. The yard still isn't closed. Nothing was the same, and I'm so mad that I didn't know some of the last were the last. The last Lions game with his astronaut shoes. The last time we closed the pool, and I said, "You should show me what you do one of these days so I can do this for you." I had to watch numerous YouTube videos come this fall. Just a few months ago, I read the MRI after the chemo had just kept the tumor at bay and was overcome with sadness. And I looked at him, and he gave me his cheesy smile, and it killed me. I think I'll remember that moment forever, like he knew I needed it. I was watching a TV show the other night, and they were talking about an old Apache saying that said when you love somebody, they give you a piece of themselves. They give a piece of themselves to you, and you give a piece of yourselves to them. And when they pass away, they still belong with you. I liked that. I hope that's true. So I'm going to end this by saying, go see the world. And if you love my dad, please go see the corners of the world that he didn't get to see, that a crappy tumor robbed him of. Maybe raise a glass, cheers him. Tell the universe that he was loved and he is missed.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. You're not ugly when you cry, Hannah. Randy was one of the funniest, wittiest people you'd ever know. He could mimic someone's voice or accent perfectly. In many of the photos we've gathered, you'll notice the person talking to Randy is laughing and smiling at him. He was so fun and funny. I'm going to repeat what Randy said, because I said this the most. I'd say, I'm going to run to the store, and he'd say, take the cards faster. Not just once. Every time I said, I'm going to run to the store. You'd think I would have stopped saying, I'm going to run to the store. If a doctor would say, I'm going to check your hearing, he'd say, what? A couple of doctors. Anyways, if you said, I'm hungry, he'd say, hi, hungry, I'm Randy. And don't say I'm going to hop in the shower, because you'd certainly get a Randy kind of response. He could quote lines from movies watched over and over when the kids were younger, which he would say in the perfect voice of the actor. The movie Willow was one of his favorites to quote from. Randy coached the kids' youth soccer teams before the players became too accomplished for his skills. He was a yeller, which Isaac mentioned. Not a mean or disparaging yeller, but calling out names and directing players to push up, mark someone, so much so that one of Isaac's teams bought him a t-shirt which read, I yell because I care. Following his stint as amateur coach, Randy became the boys' high school soccer team's game recorder. He taped every game the boys played and was very good at it. That night, the coach and many players would gather at our house to replay the game. It was a very good team, and they were so fun to watch, even twice in a row. Randy had found old wooden church pews, which were freestanding and they folded down. He had enough to probably seat 30 people. He carried those pews to every home soccer game along with our grill, and he and Bob Russo would grill burgers, chicken, and dogs. Players and their families stayed after the game for a potluck where folks sat on those pews. Randy played high school sports himself, with football being the sport he excelled in. However, his proudest sports achievement was fouling out of a game of basketball in 43 seconds. Apparently, Randy was a hack. He didn't get in much, playing mostly to stay in shape. As it happened, he got called into the game. The next thing the coach knows, Randy's coming out, and he says, what are you doing? Randy says, I fouled out. He says, you couldn't have fouled out. He said, I did. I fouled out. Randy tended to keep most things. Many were put to good use, and others not so much. He collected bricks from the street where the Black and Tan Bar was in downtown Lansing when it was torn down to build a new state office building. Although I remember hauling the bricks. I don't remember Justin and his friends. There must have been 2 trips. I don't know. So the bricks are now the patio at the house on Blackwood. And the metal gates that adorn the entry to the Mole Hole, another old iconic Lansing business, are the gates to our garden. Randy had found a lamppost from the Board of Water and Light. Found, I hope. Exactly like the ones lining the downtown Lansing street. It's 20 feet tall, maybe 25 feet tall, and it's heavy. He gets it home somehow. He runs electricity out to the spot where he's going to put it in and prepares the ground. Then he tries to raise it upright with just me helping. Suffice it to say, we weren't succeeding, and eventually our neighbor Bob Schroeder took pity on us and came over to help. So the 3 of us were still struggling when some random guy driving down the road stops and helped. The light post is still standing, true and strong, lighting the corner of our neighborhood. Randy collected rocks for years. He traveled around the state to various National Guard armories. Whenever he saw a big rock in a field or on the side of the road, he grabbed it and brought it home. Sometimes he'd pull up and he'd put 3, 4, 5 out of the back of the truck. The yard on Blackwood is full of rock gardens made from those he had gathered, with many remaining stockpiled for future use. Randy did everything there is to do around a house. He ended up being able to do laundry as well as I can, which is saying something, since I was taught by my mother, who was a laundress supreme. When we were hosting holiday parties, Randy was in the kitchen with me, cleaning, chopping, and cooking. Randy loved gardening. It wasn't just me. The soil around our house was not the best, so he began composting shortly after we moved to DeWitt. After 30 years, our garden soil is as rich as you'd ever see. and I'm going to say this since I think it's legal, but I grew 2 marijuana plants this summer. and they were 10 feet tall and 30 feet around. And when people walked into the yard, you could smell marijuana. And my brother-in-law, Mike, he was mowing our lawn for us, and he said, "You need to be careful. Somebody's going to steal these." I said, "How are they going to steal them?" He said, "I had a friend, and they'll pull up here and yank it out." But anyway, so the garden soil is unbelievable. And Ashley has a picture of the marijuana plants that she'll show you afterwards. So anyway, after 30 years, our garden soil is as rich as you'd ever see. The garden was relatively small, but produced enough to give away vegetables to family and friends and to can 40 quarts of salsa yearly. Randy labeled the tops of the jars, noting the number and kind of peppers he put in each batch. So it'd have 12 jalapenos, 2 habaneros, 4 red ones, cayenne. So he'd know the exact ingredients, so if it turned out too hot, then he wouldn't make it the same way again. But of course, no one could ever remember what was in anything we ate. Black Fridays, back in the day when they were actually fun and started at 4 a.m., I went out with Randy, not my girlfriends, but Randy. And we would race around town, hitting the bargains at the various stores, with Randy making multiple trips to the car and lugging all the bags around. And he was good at shopping, and I'm not kidding. Or finding a matching top or jewelry to go with whatever I was looking at, or finding the size I needed. We went overboard for Christmas, buying multiple gifts for each of our children and grandchildren. So I would literally be wrapping presents for days, with each present having a bow. And Randy put his finger in the center of each and every one so I could tie it tight. And I won't make a bow again without thinking of him. Randy would wear ugly Christmas sweaters, and you've seen pictures of him in one. And he grew his beard out, which had become white, so he would look like Santa. And when we'd go out, he'd wear a Santa hat, so he could hear the kids whisper to the parents, "There's Santa." He saw a man at a restaurant with a dress suit made of Christmas printed fabric. He wanted that suit. And we searched all over, unfortunately, to no avail. But the fact that he wanted one and would have worn it proudly says something about his personality. We'd go to the Renaissance Festival a couple of times each year, and Randy dressed up as much as I did. He'd wear hats and jewelry and carry a flask and play the role. Speaking of hats, he loved hats. He wore one every time he left the house. And he'd go, if he'd forget it, he'd go, "My hat, my hat." He wore one every time he left the house, and his collection easily exceeds 30 hats, with many being well worn. He was always telling me how beautiful I was and how no one loved me like he did, which I guess could have more than one meaning, but I'm choosing the good one. When he became ill again in February, we were in Florida, and he went into the hospital through the emergency room. At that time, they didn't allow anyone in with the patient, so I waited outside. Eventually, a nurse came up to me and said, "Are you Joan?" I said yes, and she said, "Your husband told me to look for the beautiful woman." For Valentine's Day and my birthday, Randy always bought me a card where he would add a rhyming poem to it. To my honey, to the best thing that happened to me, to the love of my life, to my lovely wife, to the birthday queen, my Valentine. This says, "Joan, darling. I'm sorry this is late, but I did not forget your birthday date. So let's sit back and have a beer, and I will tell how much I love you, dear. Happy birthday to my queen." Hallmark loved him. I'm not happy when you're away, but when you are here, I can kiss you every day. I hope those days never end, because I would Uh-oh. I hope those days never end because it would mean he didn't print very well. It would mean you are not here with me like before we met. To my loving bride, I love you with all my heart. It's awfully quiet when we're apart. I wait patiently for you to come home so I can have you all my own. Even though the end was too soon, Randy was thankful for his life. He realized, as I do, there are many people who had far less time than he did. Very young people who were sick and in the hospital. So in perspective, he was grateful. He lived 17 years after his initial diagnosis. All good years where he was strong and healthy. He was able to see our grandchildren graduate, get married, and be there for the birth of all of his grandchildren. We did pretty much anything we wanted to do and had all kinds of good times. These last 10 months were at times difficult for Randy, but he remained eternally optimistic. Amazingly, he didn't have any pain, which was such a gift. Through it all, he didn't complain. And I'm not kidding, he did not complain. And he lived as if he would see 80. I could go on and on, but suffice it to say, Randy was the love of my life, and that's a fact. He had a great life, we had a great life, and he will be forever missed. We are having dinner and drinks at Ellison Brewery on Grand River in East Lansing. Randy Baby printed out little sheets of paper that are out where the sign-in book is that has the address and a little direction. So please join us. We're going to celebrate Randy's life a little more and enjoy each other's company. Thank you.